Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Friday morning, talking tonight's 10-game slate around the association. Gonna hop right in. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. Check out my Twitter, Patreon, all that good stuff. But lots and lots to talk about, so not gonna waste any time here. First game of the night that we're gonna talk about: Detroit at Charlotte. Charlotte 3.5-point favorites in this one. 217.5 over under. Kemba Walker broke out for 30 points on 11 of 26 shooting on Wednesday after totaling just 20 points on 8 of 33 shooting in the previous two contests, so that was nice to see. Reggie Bullock scored a career-high 33 points on Wednesday. He was a guy that was highlighted in my notes and podcast last time out. Marvin Williams had a really good game last time out as well. 18 points and 10 rebounds, another option that was highlighted in my notes and podcast last time out. But taking a look at the Detroit side of this game first, I do have some interest in a few of these options. Blake Griffin coming in on the heels of 350 plus fantasy point outings. He is definitely interesting in this spot against Charlotte. It's a spot where he's had success before this season. He's averaging 26.5 points, 9 rebounds, 7 assists on 51% shooting and 44% three-point shooting over the last 4 games. Leads the team in usage at 29.4%. Hornets ranked 22nd in defensive efficiency to power forwards. Definitely my top option from the Detroit side of this game. I just absolutely love playing Blake Griffin in a spot like this, but it is really tough, especially over on DraftKings, to overlook Andre Drummond at 8,900. This is a pretty good spot for him as well. Charlotte ranks 22nd in defensive efficiency to centers, giving up 23.5 points and 15.6 rebounds to the position. They're giving up, 46.6 rebounds per game, 49.6 points in the paint, 14 second chance points. This is a pretty good spot for Andre Drummond, who has kind of struggled a little bit recently. Still pulling down, double doubles pretty regularly. Just has not been getting some of the other stats. It was nice to see against Boston. Obviously had a really, really good game. A decent game against this Charlotte team last time out, but I definitely have some interest here in Andre Drummond, especially at just 8,900. Reggie Bullock, again, I highlighted him in the last podcast, but this is a great spot for him as well, averaging 56.5% shooting and 55% from three-point range since returning from injury, to go along with 24 points per game. I expect him to be a popular option, but I still really, really like him here against a Charlotte team that does struggle against corner threes. This is a good spot here for Reggie Bullock, and he's had some success against this team as well. Actually, the last time these teams played, he missed, but he actually had a good outing against them early on in the season where he put up 23 points on 7 of 13 shooting. So he's going to continue to play a lot of minutes as long as he is contributing, and I have some interest in him. You can look at Reggie Jackson, Langston Galloway, if in the spot if you wish. I do have some interest in Langston Galloway as a value play. If you just look at the minutes that he's playing and the field goal attempts recently, they are pretty solid and appealing in this spot. Detroit side of things, or Charlotte side of things, I mentioned Kemba Walker snapping out of a little bit of a shooting funk. He comes in at 8,600 on DraftKings. That's pretty appealing in this spot against a Detroit team that does struggle to defend point guards. He's 9,600 on FanDuel, a little less appealing, but like I said, it was nice to see him snap out of that shooting funk. This is a good matchup for him. Put up 31, 9, and 8 the last time these teams faced off, averaging about 50 fantasy points per game against them. Detroit ranks 26th in defensive efficiency to point guards. They're allowing 26 points, 7.2 rebounds, 8.7 assists, and 46% shooting to the position. They also struggle to defend the rim, where Kemba is taking 32% of his shots. So I really, really like Kemba Walker. He's going to be an overlooked option in this spot tonight, and I have a lot of interest in him, especially in tournaments. I do like Marvin Williams once again in this spot. 17% of his field goal attempts are corner threes. Detroit allowing 41.4% shooting on corner threes. Definitely a tournament option for me here. A little bit pricey, 4,900 on DraftKings, 5,600 on FanDuel. But we've seen the upside out of him. This is a good spot for him tonight. Going to play a lot of minutes again, as long as he's contributing, and with a too big lineup on the other side in Detroit. I expect Marvin Williams to get the bulk of the run at the 4 here. You can look at Lamb as a cash or tournament option. He's just really, really expensive, 6,200 on DraftKings, 7K on FanDuel, but he's justified that price tag recently, so I have some interest there. Zeller. Cody Zeller has been really solid for Charlotte this season. 67% of his field goal attempts come at the rim. We know Detroit struggles to defend the rim. Cody Zeller at 5K on DraftKings, a very appealing cash game option, but he does have some upside. Put up 24 fantasy points against his team last time out, about 27, 28 the first time these teams played. This is a pretty good spot for Cody Zeller, so I have some interest in him in cash tonight. Moving on to Cleveland at Toronto. Toronto 12-point favorites in this game. 206 over under. So, yeah, somewhat unappealing just from a point spread total. But Lowry is out. Dellavedova is questionable. Ibaka is questionable. Tristan Thompson is out. Kevin Love is out. And with Kawhi, this is the first game of a back-to-back. I mentioned it last time. Toronto was in a set of back-to-backs. He was close to being cleared. At least rumors were that he was close to being cleared to play in back-to-backs. So we want to keep an eye on that. If they were going to rest him, it would definitely be this game because they do have Philly tomorrow. But also, if they were going to clear him for back-to-backs, it would make a lot of sense for them to do it now because Kyle Lowry is out. Looking at a couple of streaks for some of these guys, Jordan Clarkson averaging 22.3 points over his past 4 games. Kawhi Leonard averaged 29 points, 11 rebounds as the Raptors won this season's first 2 meetings by an average of 11.5 points. So Kawhi Leonard has crushed the Cavs so far this season. It's not really a great spot for any of the Cavaliers. I'll cover that side first. Obviously, Larry Nance has been absolutely stellar since taking over the bulk of the minutes whenever Tristan Thompson went down. He still has upside and potential here. He does have a double-double in 3 of the last 4 games. Just has been playing really, really well. And obviously averages over a fantasy point per minute whenever you take Tristan Thompson off the floor. Toronto over the last 5 games does rank 25th in defensive efficiency to centers. They've given up 23 points and 16.4 rebounds. I like Larry Nance in cash and tournaments. That price tag is a little bit restrictive, so I probably just say, if you think you're going to get a really, really low ownership on Larry Nance, and there's a decent chance there is low ownership on him, he makes a very, very, very good tournament option because he does still have upside at that price tag. And it's nice to see the assist numbers. I mentioned it last time out, but he is filling the void for Cleveland when it comes to a playmaking ball handler. Colin Sexton is not a guy that gets any assist. The dude just cannot do anything for his teammates. He is just a shoot first point guard that doesn't really do much playmaking. Larry Nance has had to fill in that role, and that makes him appealing here. Clarkson, the other guy that I do have a little bit of interest in, I mentioned he's been really productive recently, but 19.6 points, 4.8 rebounds, 3 assists on 43% shooting of late. He operates in the pick and roll about 30% of his possessions. Raptors have allowed 0.97 points per possession in the pick and roll. I have some interest here in Clarkson coming in at 5,500 on DraftKings. He is 5,400 on FanDuel. More of a pivot off of who I think is going to be very popular in Fred VanVleet. Obviously, VanVleet minutes most likely going to be more than Jordan Clarkson, but if you take a look, we've seen Clarkson eclipse 30 minutes several times, and it's because he's playing really well. So if he's out there actually contributing, I think this is a spot where Clarkson potentially has a little bit more upside than Fred VanVleet. So in large field tournaments or 20-entry tournaments or something like that, I definitely don't hate using Clarkson as a pivot off of Fred VanVleet, but in cash games, obviously, you're looking at Fred VanVleet. Outside of that, you can sprinkle in Sexton if you want to, or Alec Burks, but it's really just not an appealing spot for much of Cleveland. Looking at the Toronto side, I did hit on Fred VanVleet, but I will focus on Kawhi Leonard here first. Whenever you take Jonas Valanciunas and Kyle Lowry off the floor, Kawhi Leonard, 36.3% usage rate, 1.36 fantasy points per minute. It is a fantastic spot here for him. He's been just ridiculous recently, averaging 28.3 points, 4.7 assists, 10 rebounds per game on 51% shooting over his last three. Cleveland, 22nd defense efficiency to small forwards. Definitely a guy that I am looking at building my lineups around. If you can afford him, it's just a really, really, really good spot here for Kawhi Leonard. So I absolutely love him. 9,500 on DraftKings, and is he over on FanDuel? He is 10-4 on FanDuel. Good core cash game option, tournament upside for sure. I don't hate Fred VanVleet, as I mentioned. A really solid floor most nights. Obviously did have a down game against the Pacers, which was just an atrocious matchup. A down game against Golden State, but at 5,500 on DraftKings, very, very solid cash game option. 5,300 on FanDuel. So going to be really, really chalky. Prices coming up. Inconsistent in a few of these games, but he does average a little over a fantasy point per minute. Cleveland ranks 29th in defensive efficiency to point guards. Again, because of the expected ownership, the increase in price, things like that, the inconsistency, I would definitely consider looking elsewhere in GPPs, but in cash games, it makes a ton of sense because he's going to be popular. In tournaments, again, you can pivot to someone like Clarkson in the same game. You can consider DeLon Wright as a value pivot in this spot. Danny Green is interesting. 25% of his field goal attempts are corner threes. Cleveland allowing 41.4% on corner threes. He's fine in cash in tournaments. And then Serge and Siakam, both guys that I have interest in, but not guys that I'm forcing into a lot of my lineups here tonight. Moving on to Indiana at Brooklyn. Indiana 2-point favorites, 211.5 over under. We know that Allen Crabbe and Karis LeVert are out. Tyreek Evans is questionable for this game. The Nets, winners of 7 in a row. Pretty crazy. Dinwiddie averaging 24 points during that 7-game winning streak. And then Miles Turner has been playing really well for the Pacers recently. A double-double in each of the last 2 games and has 9 blocks over that span. So that's pretty impressive for Miles Turner. I'll cover the Indiana side first. I have interest in Oladipo here. Continues to be the fulcrum in the offense. Nets have struggled to defend shooters in the paint and the mid-range. 39% of his field goal attempts come in the paint or the mid-range. Obviously, high usage guy. Brooklyn's defense has not been terrible. It has not been nearly as bad as people think. But you can still pick on him. And Victor Oladipo at 8,100 on DraftKings, 8,300 on FanDuel. Coming in, playing a bunch of minutes, obviously. It's just a good spot here for him. And I don't know that he's going to be a popular option. Like, I think he's just going to be really, really overlooked. And I have a lot of interest in him, especially at the $8,100 price tag. So really, really good spot here for Victor Oladipo. The status of Tyreek Evans does have a little bit of an impact on whether or not I have interest in Domantas Sabonis. I've talked about it before, but I really like Sabonis whenever Tyreek Evans is either out of the lineup or in the starting lineup because Oladipo is out, because a lot of the ball handling goes to Sabonis on that second unit. We obviously do want to consider some exposure to a big man against this Nets team. Sabonis has been playing really well recently, but it's one of those things where I think I have more interest in him if Tyreek Evans is going to be out. Obviously, Miles Turner, who I mentioned, has double-doubles in back-to-back games, 9 blocks over that span. He is a fantastic option here tonight against the Nets, who have a lot of guys that take a lot of shots at the rim. You have Spencer Dinwiddie and D'Angelo Russell, who take a decent amount of shots at the rim. Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, Joe Harris. A lot of these guys take a buttload of shots at the rim, and that helps his upside. It's obviously centers against the Nets, who are giving up like 15.4 second chance points and a league high like 65 fantasy points per game to the position. So Miles Turner at 7,300 on DraftKings and FanDuel, pretty appealing here. Thad Young has been ridiculously good of late. 5,800 on DraftKings and 5,800 on FanDuel. I'm gonna hop off the Thad Young train, strictly because elevated price tag, really low floor, but minutes are there for him, and it is a revenge game for Thad Young. It's not a great matchup, but you can sprinkle in some Thad Young, especially in cash games. Same with like Bogdan, but that'd be about it. I don't really have a lot of interest in Brooklyn in the spot. Pacers, obviously, one of the league's best defenses. They've held 3 straight opponents under 100 points. Um, but with Crab and Caris over it out, that does open up minutes in the rotation for D'Angelo Russell, Spencer Dinwiddie, um, Joe Harris, Rodions Kurek. Some of these guys are at least options to consider. I would lean towards Dinwiddie and Russell being the guys that I do have the most interest in. Of course, I mentioned Dinwiddie just been on fire recently. 25.2 points, 5 assists, 3.2 rebounds, 45% three-point shooting, and 54% from the floor. He's a cash game option for me, night in, night out. Price is a little bit high, but definitely someone that you can consider. Joe Harris taking 10% of his field goal attempts as corner threes. He has shot 56% from three over the past 5 games. He's an interesting value option here as the Pacers do struggle a little bit to defend the three-point line. Joe Harris, someone at 4,700 on DraftKings and 4,500 on FanDuel. I do have some interest in here tonight. Had a good game against Indiana last time these teams played. A really, really solid value option here. And then Jared Allen in tournaments is perfectly fine. Moving on to a very, very, very appealing game. Atlanta at the New York Knicks. 2.5 point favorites for the Knicks. 230 over under. John Collins, in his past 11 games, has posted 9 double-doubles, averaging 20.6 points and 11.4 rebounds over that span. Dwayne Dedmon has 2 consecutive double-doubles, a 6 for 6 from three-point range in that span. Moutier has been really, really well. Averaged 20 points per game in his previous 9 games entering Wednesday. Finished with just 11 points in that one, but really, really solid here for him. The Knicks have allowed 120-plus points 4 times in their last 8 games. That's definitely interesting whenever you're looking at a very, very short-handed Atlanta side. We have Taurean Prince, Miles Plumlee, Omari Spellman all out, Alonzo Trier and Mitchell Robinson out for the Knicks. I think John Collins is one of the top options on the slate. Once again tonight, it is a fantastic spot for him. Averaging 39.6 fantasy points on 20 points, 13 rebounds, 51% shooting. Yeah, it's a good spot for him. 27.8% usage rate, 1.30 fantasy points per minute whenever you take Prince and some of these other guys off the floor. Knicks have given up 46.3 rebounds, 52 points in the paint. They rank 26th in defensive efficiency to power forwards. I expect John Collins to be popular, and I expect John Collins to have a monster game in the spot. Has over 40 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. I love me some John Collins tonight. I mentioned Dwayne Dedmon, who's been really consistent of late. He can be used in all formats. It is a very, very good spot for him as well. Bazemore averages 1.08 fantasy points per minute whenever you take Prince off the floor. Takes 36% of his shots at the rim. Knicks allow 65% shooting at the rim. 26% of his shots are above the break threes, where they allow 38%. I really like Kent Bazemore, who has been pretty consistent recently. Obviously, did have a little bit of a down game against Washington, but getting you those assist numbers, taking double-digit shots. I have a lot of interest in Kent Bazemore in this spot tonight. Outside of that, you can look at Kevin Huerter, who is a very, very solid value option. Has topped 30 points in 3 of the last 4. You can look at Young in tournaments. He continues to struggle. His numbers have just been really, really bad, and a lot of it comes from just not shooting very well. Has shot better in 3 of the last 4 games. Did have a little bit of upside in a couple of those outings. He's still just shooting just really, really, really poorly, especially over the span of the entire season. So just tournaments only for me here. Jeremy Lin, revenge game, returning to the Garden, 3,800 coming off 24 minutes last game. That's a little bit interesting. I might get some Jeremy Lin in my life tonight. With the Knicks being relatively healthy, obviously the exception of Robinson and Trier, there's always some risk of getting Fizdaled, but it's been promising to see that he hasn't been too crazy with his rotations recently. Moutier has been really, really good, topping 30 minutes in 8 of the last 10 games, averaging 19.5 points, 6.5 assists, or 6 assists, 4 rebounds on 48% shooting over that span. Faces a Hawks team, 30th in defensive efficiency to point guards. They've really, really allowed them to shoot. They've allowed them to shoot 42% from three. I have interest in Moutier here at 6,200. Pretty solid cash game option. I feel pretty comfortable rolling him out in cash, given that he has just been really consistent recently and has not really been susceptible to Fizdale being Fizdale. This is a Tim Hardaway Jr. revenge game. He does own a 26% usage rate on the season. The Hawks rank 26th in defensive efficiency. This opposing shooting guards are shooting 45% again on the floor and 38.4% from three. He can definitely be used in all formats. This is a pretty good spot for Tim Hardaway Jr. Coming off a really solid game against Philly, where he shot 7 of 16 from the floor. I expect his minutes to trend upwards, and he has torched the Hawks into previous games this season. I do really like Noah Vonleh and Enes Kanter. I think Vonleh is the guy that I have the most interest in, just price considered. It is a really, really good spot for him. Rebounding potential through the roof here for him and the Hawks, one of the worst teams in the NBA defending power forwards. Kevin Knox is going to be a fade for me at that price tag, $6K on DraftKings, $6,300 on FanDuel. If it bites me in the ass, it bites me in the ass. And I mentioned Kanter, who has been playing really well. And without Mitchell Robinson tonight, he could get a few extra minutes in this spot. Moving on to Milwaukee at Boston. Boston 1.5 point favorites, 224.5 over under. Ersan is out. Al Horford is out. Marcus Morris is questionable. Aaron Baines is out. And Gershon Yabusele is no longer on the injury report. Kyrie Irving, averaging 29.3 points over his last 4 games, has been very, very, very good over that span. And this is a spot where I have a lot of interest in him once again tonight, even though matchup not terribly great. I'll get to that in just a second. Giannis, obviously the top option from the Milwaukee side of this game, offers just an immense upside, especially at 11K on DraftKings. Priced a little bit down, I think, for the matchup, 11-7 on FanDuel. Celtics defense obviously going to be tested whenever you take Horford and Baines off the floor. Opponents are shooting 44% on mid-range attempts with those guys off the floor. They're allowing a few more three-pointers as well. Giannis is Giannis. I don't really need to go into a whole lot here. I do really, really like him as a tournament option in this spot tonight. I do have interest in Middleton and Brogdon here. I mentioned Boston allowing a little bit higher shooting in the mid-range and a few more three-pointers whenever you take Horford and Baines off the floor. Some of that just could be noise. It's not a very large sample size, but both those guys definitely interesting. Brogdon continues to be just a great cash game option, night in, night out. Never really gets a price hike. He's 5,500 on DraftKings, 5,400 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Like I said, just continues to be a strong cash game option. He's producing really, really strong numbers. Had a down game against Indiana, but I mean, high 20s, low 30s most of these games, and he continues to be like 50 in the mid 5Ks most nights. So I love me some Malcolm Brogdon in the spot. Just a guy just so freaking consistent. Chris Middleton, pretty decent spot for him coming off a really rough stretch of games. Just has not been shooting very well, but I do like him in tournaments. You can look at Lopez and Bledsoe. Bledsoe, a guy that's been playing pretty well recently over the last 5 games, but it's one of those spots where I would rather look elsewhere tonight. Looking at the Boston side of things, I did mention Kyrie Irving, 1.45 fantasy points per minute, 37% usage rate. It's only like 107 minutes whenever you take Baines and Horford off the floor, but it's a really, really good spot here for him. We like targeting guys that can shoot in the paint or in the mid-range because Milwaukee gets torched in those areas. 36% of his shots come in the paint or the mid-range. I love me some Kyrie Irving tonight at 8,700 on DraftKings. He is What is he over on FanDuel? 9,400 on FanDuel. Just how consistent and how good he's been recently, really, really tough to fade that. I think the Bucks could get a good dose of Marcus Smart in the spot, and he's pretty intriguing. Pretty quietly putting together a really, really strong stretch of games. Obviously struggled a little bit against Atlanta, but minutes have been there for him. Production has really, really been there. Some of the assist numbers have been pretty solid for him here. I like Marcus Smart, 4,900 on DraftKings, 5,400 on FanDuel. Really, really good cash game option. Again, I expect him to be on the floor a lot tonight. They just need his defense and the style of play that he brings against a Milwaukee team that has a lot of guys that can distribute and shoot the ball. Jaylen Brown has been atrocious recently, shooting just 29% from the floor. You can use him in tournaments. Morris, 41% of his shots come in the paint or the mid-range or corner threes. I have a lot of interest in Morris, another really, really solid option. 5,700 on DraftKings, 6K on FanDuel. Should be able to go in this game. And he averages 1.11 fantasy points per minute whenever you take Horford and Baines off the floor. So really, really solid spot for him. Really solid spot for Jason Tatum as well. Tatum, a guy I don't know that people are really talking about most nights, continues just to be a pretty consistent guy. Has lots of upside as well. Minutes are going to be pretty solid for him with a shortened rotation. Obviously, Robert Williams and Daniel Tice are going to garner a lot of ownership. Robert Williams, 3,800 on DraftKings, 4,600 on FanDuel. I don't hate using him here. Obviously, you get a young guy in a matchup like this, foul trouble could be a little bit of an issue. Has not really struggled with fouls too much so far this season, but again, you got a lot of guys like Giannis driving to the rim, so foul trouble could be a little bit of concern. I still don't hate taking a shot on him in tournaments or even in cash games as a value. In large field tournaments, I would definitely be looking at Daniel Tice as a pivot here tonight. Such a large slate here. Moving on to Orlando at Charlotte. Orlando 3-point favorites, 204.5 over under. Vucevic is probable. Mozgov out. Simmons is questionable. Frazier questionable. Payne questionable. Parker probable. Bobby Portis out. Denzel Valentine is out, and Zach LaVine is out. Man, this game. So many injuries. We're getting to a stretch of games where it's like a ton of freaking injuries. The Magic have failed to reach 100 points in any of their last 5 games, and the Bulls have been held below 100 points in each of their last 6 games. Two teams really, really struggling on offense. Chicago, their defense has been better, but with Parker potentially returning to the rotation, could change. Chicago is definitely getting destroyed on the boards, giving up 48.7 rebounds, ranking 30th in defensive efficiency to centers. Really, really tough to imagine Vucevic not just going absolutely apeshit bananas in this spot. I do love Vucevic pretty much all formats. Continues to lead the team in usage, continues to be a focal point of the offense. Should just absolutely feast. 9,200 on DraftKings, 9K on FanDuel. I do love me some Vucevic, and I don't think he's going to be a very popular option tonight, so I really, really, really like him here in the spot. I do like Aaron Gordon a significant amount as well. Should be able to get pretty much anything he wants, especially if we're going to get some Jabari Parker minutes in there. Aaron Gordon at 6,700 on DraftKings, 7,100 on FanDuel. Really appealing tournament option in this spot tonight. Outside of that, Fournier obviously second on the team in usage, 23.4%. Chicago's struggling to defend spot up shooters. He's perfectly fine in cash and tournaments here. Just a guy. That's pretty much all it comes down to. 5,500 on DraftKings and 5,700 on FanDuel. I expect him to take a decent amount of shots here tonight, so I have some interest in him. Terrence Ross can be used in cash. as well. And DJ Augustin continues to be a guy that just goes overlooked as a cash game point guard. Most nights is going to pay off his salary with ease. I have some interest in him as well. Uh, Chicago, man, this team is so bad. Chris Dunn is interesting in as like an option in all formats. Orlando does rank 21st in defensive efficiency of point guards. He can definitely fill up the stat sheet. The biggest issue I have with him is I think he's going to be more popular than he absolutely should be. Coming off a couple of strong outings, but he's just really inconsistent. Obviously, some of these have been bad matchups. But he's just, like I said, just really inconsistent. Not a guy that I want to chase the ownership on if he's going to be really popular. I would rather find pivot options here. But if it looks like he's going to be super low owned, then fine. In tournaments, you can use him. Holiday, the guy that I have the most interest in here. Orlando allowing small forwards to shoot 38.7% from three. Has hoisted double-digit field goal attempts in 8 of the last 10 games. Has struggled with his shot over the last 3 games. He's been in a pretty big shooting slump. 6 of 32 from the floor over the last 3, but he's supplementing his stat line with assists and steals and some rebounds and things like that. So I have interest in him at a pretty cheap price tag across the industry. Lowry Markkinen, I don't expect him to take just 6 field goal attempts again tonight. I do have a lot of interest in him as well. Robin Lopez, so just a name to keep an eye on, especially on DraftKings if you're building a bunch of lineups or you're playing on FanDuel and you want to punt center. There's a chance he could get thrust into a few extra minutes here with Bobby Portis being out. Has not produced very well even in extended minutes, but it's something to consider here. Definitely something to consider, especially at 3K on DraftKings, and he is just 3,500 on FanDuel. Like I said, just something to consider if you're building a ton of lineups or you're punting the position. Moving on, Minnesota at San Antonio. San Antonio, 4-point favorites in this one, 223 over under. Jeff Teague is out. Pau Gasol is out as well. Rounding the home stretch, just 4 games to go. San Antonio been playing really well recently. Last 4 victories have been by an average of 32.3 points. Their defense has been better. They beat the Sixers and Magic by an average of 33 points. Have held 6 straight teams to below 100 points. All of that is interesting to note whenever you're considering the Minnesota side of this game could be very, very chalky, especially with guys like Derrick Rose and Karl Anthony Towns. That being said, Rose and Towns, really, really good options in this spot tonight, especially for cash. Rose has averaged 38 DraftKings points per game when Jeff Teague has been out this season. 31% usage rate, 1.05 fantasy points per minute. Spurs allowing opponents to shoot 64.3% at the rim, where Rose is taking 65% of his shots. So really tough to imagine fading that in cash games. Again, in tournaments, given how good this Spurs defense has been, worth maybe considering fading, especially at an elevated price tag of $7,200 on DraftKings and $7,300 on FanDuel. Towns, again, mentioned fine in cash in tournaments. Again, it is worth noting how good the Spurs defense has been recently whenever you're building tournament lineups. But he's still 32% of his shots come at the rim, 41% in the paint, averages just a crap ton since November 10th when Butler was traded, 1.59 fantasy points per minute and a 29% use rate whenever you take Jeff Teague off the floor. Covington fine in cash, Wiggins fine in tournaments. Josh Okogie has been really, really, really good. Has topped 28 minutes in back-to-back games. Takes 65% of his shots at the rim, in the paint, or the mid-range, where San Antonio is still struggling to defend. Okogie at 3,300 on DraftKings. Pretty appealing as a value. 3,600 on FanDuel. Even in cash, I think you can look at him as a value here, just given you expect him to play a decent amount of minutes regardless of what happens in this game. I don't really have a lot of interest in the Spurs. LMA, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Rudy Gay options to consider. Wolves ranked 17th in defensive efficiency to centers on the season. They've allowed opponents 46.4 rebounds. LaMarcus Aldridge is fine in cash. Has, if I recall correctly, performed historically pretty well against Karl Anthony Towns. Gay has been really good recently, averaging 34.5 fantasy points on 17.7.2 rebounds and 65% field goal percentage over his last 6. The Wolves do kind of struggle defending wings and in the paint, so I do have some interest in him. I think Covington spends most of his time on DeMar DeRozan, which is going to make DeRozan just a tournament option. That's obviously could open up some of the offense for Rudy Gay and LaMarcus Aldridge and the plethora of guards that you can try to predict which one Popovich is going to play more minutes. It just depends on who the hot hand is. As you can see, Bryn Forbes has struggled in this matchup twice already this season. Derek White, not very good twice in one of the matchups already this season. Patty Mills, not very good in 2 matchups this season. Maybe Derek White would be the way that I would go, but I'm just not going to try to predict which one of those guards is going to go off. Utah at Portland. Portland 2-point favorites in this one, 212 over under. The only injury news, Caleb Swanigan is probable. Mitchell is shooting just 21 of 69 over his 3-game shooting slump. Rudy Gobert has pulled down 5 straight double-doubles, or double-digit rebound games, and 4 double-doubles. Damian Lillard has been really solid recently, scoring 20 or more points in 8 of his 9 games this month. And Al-Farouq Aminu, after being somewhat on a somewhat hot streak, is averaging just 5.5 points over the past 2 games. Utah side of this game, not very appealing, at least not for me. There are a couple of options to consider. Rudy Gobert, as I mentioned, has been playing really well recently. Taking a look at his game logs, he's 7,700, which is a little bit intriguing. He is 85 on FanDuel, but 40 plus fantasy points in back-to-back games, playing the minutes, staying out of foul trouble, not throwing cups and yelling at referees as much. He's interesting in tournaments. Portland has struggled against dominant big men, guys that can post up and put up second chance opportunities. 14.1 second chance opportunities allowed points allowed this season. So I do have some interest in him in tournaments. 41% of Crowder's field goal attempts are above the break threes. 42% of Ingles' field goal attempts are above the break threes. Portland is allowing 39% on above the break threes. I really like Joe Ingles in tournaments. This is a spot where I have highlighted small forwards against Portland for quite a while now. Joe Ingles has not been playing very well recently. A little bit of a shooting slump as well. Definitely could break out in this spot, though. Portland against small forwards this season, allowing 44.1% on 3-point attempts. Again, Joe Ingles, 5,700 on DraftKings, 5,800 on FanDuel. One of my favorite tournament options on the entire slate. I would definitely be getting some Joe Ingles exposure here tonight. Rubio Mitchell, fine in tournaments. I just don't have a lot of interest in those 2 guys tonight. Portland side of this game is pretty appealing. Obviously, I mentioned Damian Lillard. Really torrid streak recently, especially shooting 3-pointers. 63.3% from beyond the arc over his last 5 games. Utah allowing 38.4% on above the break threes. This is a spot where Damian Lillard probably going to go overlooked, especially with Kyrie Irving in the same price range. And that absolutely should not be the case. Damian Lillard could have a really, really good game here tonight. I really like him in all formats. I like McCollum in tournaments here. We like targeting him against teams that really can't defend in the mid-range. Teams like Milwaukee, for instance, where he has gone off. But Utah allowing 42.8% shooting in the paint, 43% shooting in the mid-range. McCollum taking 43% of his field goal attempts in those areas. I like McCollum as a tournament option. He's affordable, 6,400 on DraftKings. That's pretty fair. In this spot, I definitely would be taking some shots on McCollum in tournaments. 6,300 on FanDuel, again, really appealing in the spot. I have a lot of interest in Yusuf Nurkic as well. More of a tournament option because there is some downside to it, but the dude's putting up monster numbers when he's playing minutes. He's just not getting a ton of minutes. But Utah has struggled against centers so far this season, which is kind of surprising. But I think Nurkic is someone to definitely consider. Utah giving up 1.04 points per possession on post ups this season. Nurkic, 20% of his possessions are post ups, and of course, he can do other things. He does have the ability to notch some assists and things like that. So I have a lot of interest in Nurkic in this spot tonight. You can look at Evan Turner in cash. You can look at Aminu like value options, but Nurkic, McCollum, and Damian Lillard, the guys that I have the most interest in. Moving on to the last two games of the night. These two games, very, very tough to break down this early in the morning, given that there are a ton of injuries. So, one second. Memphis at Sacramento. Sacramento, 1-point favorites, 212 over under. Joakim Noah is questionable. Mike Conley is probable. JaMychal Green is questionable. Omri Caspi is questionable. Kyle Anderson is probable. Iman Shumpert is questionable. Bogdan Bogdanovic is questionable. Bagley, Parsons, and Dylan Brooks all out. Hopefully you caught all that. Marc Gasol averaging just 11.8 points on 36.1% shooting in 10 December games. Buddy Hield has scored at least 20 points in each of the last 5 games. So he's been really solid recently. Both of these games, again, really, really tough this early on without injury, without a clearer picture on injuries to break down, but I will do my best. Starting with the Memphis side of this game, a paced-up matchup against a somewhat poor defense has me interested in a lot of Memphis here. Conley has been really solid recently, despite battling some of that hamstring issues. Did sit out one game, but over 40 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4, playing a ton of minutes, a ton of field goal opportunities for him. It's a really good spot here for Mike Conley. Takes 66% of his shots at the rim, in the paint, or the mid-range areas that the Kings are really, really struggling to defend. I like the price tag at $7,900 on DraftKings, $8,400 on FanDuel on Mike Conley. Temple continues to play a decent amount of minutes. Kings ranked 28th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards. They've allowed him to shoot 36.4% from 3. That really, really helps Garrett Temple, who is a perfectly fine cash option, cash value option. Kyle Anderson is really interesting in this spot. Has been just really consistent so far for the majority of the season. Obviously, there have been a couple of games where he has struggled. But this is a spot where I have a lot of interest in him, especially if we're going to see him play extra minutes here tonight. Takes a lot of his shots at the rim. A fast-paced game does really... the fast-paced of this game and the fact that they do not defend the rim very well does kind of help Kyle Anderson. He takes 59% of his shots at the rim. JaMychal Green, I mentioned, is questionable for this game. Would be interesting to see if he plays. I have interest in him as a value option. Has struggled a little bit recently, but can put up pretty big numbers in limited minutes. And then Jaren Jackson Jr., obviously foul trouble every single night he takes a floor, but has smashed in two matchups against the Grizzlies already this season. 5,800 for Jaren Jackson on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel. A very, very strong cash game, or very, very strong tournament option. Kings allowing 52.4 points, 4 points in the paint, 14.5 second chance points, 47 rebounds to opponents. Marc Gasol at 7,700. Again, I mentioned he has kind of struggled a little bit with his shot, but a very strong option here tonight as well. As far as the Kings go, again, with Bogdan being questionable and Shumpert being questionable, it's a little tough to break it down. I don't really have that much interest regardless. Grizzlies, just a really, really good defense. Fox and Hield would be the two guys that I would have the most interest in. They lead the team in fast break points, and the Grizzlies have struggled a little bit to defend in the fast break. De'Aaron Fox, outside of the Minnesota game, has been on fire of late. would be a guy that I would definitely consider getting some tournament exposure to. Has actually performed really well in this matchup twice already this season, so he's someone to look at in tournaments. And the same with Buddy Hield. Again, has been playing pretty well recently. Someone else to consider in tournaments, has been pretty solid in this matchup twice already this season. Outside of those guys, I don't really care to use Willie Cauley-Stein, even though he's been somewhat decent in this matchup. Again, these guys are just tournament plays for me tonight. Final game of the night, and we have a boatload of injuries in this one too. New Orleans Pelicans at Los Angeles Lakers. Lakers favored by 5 in this one. 234.5 over under. Anthony Davis is questionable. Nikola Mirotic is doubtful. Julius Randle is questionable. Ian Clark is questionable. Rajon Rondo is questionable. Brandon Ingram is questionable. JaVale McGee is questionable. Michael Beasley and Elfrid Payton are out. Kuzma coming off his 8th 20-point effort in the past 9 games, averaging 22.8 points during that stretch. Pelicans last season averaged 28.7 points against the Lakers. As it stands, I genuinely can't break down too much of this game because I need to know if Ingram and Rondo are going to play. I need to know if Randall and Davis are going to play. It's damn near impossible right now to do a whole lot with the news that we have. Mirotic is not likely going to play, which would be a huge boost to Randall and Davis. Both guys would be core consideration options if they're able to go. Randall, 1.32 fantasy points per minute, 28.4% usage without Elfrid and Mirotic on the floor. Obviously, that does take a little bit of a dip whenever you plug him in the lineup with Holiday, Davis, and Davis alongside him, but he's still 25.7% usage rate, 1.21 fantasy points per minute. Revenge game, great matchup. Everything lines up for Julius Randle to be a really, really good play, assuming he is able to go. Same with Davis. They're both great options tonight. Lakers giving up 50 points per game in the paint, 46-1 rebounds. Huge boost to both those guys. Jrue Holiday, really, really strong option regardless of who's in, who's out, what happens with injuries. Obviously, we talk about it almost every single night. 40-plus fantasy point floor, blah, blah, blah. But Lakers 29th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards, so really strong option here in all formats. And then Tim Frazier, someone that I have some interest in, has played like absolute garbage the last couple of games, and that is a little concerning. But at 4,300 on DraftKings, a pretty strong value option tonight. He's 4,600 on FanDuel. Flipping over to the Lakers side, again, can't really do much because we need to know if Ingram and Rondo are going to play. Same with McGee, because I don't want to play Lonzo Ball or Kyle Kuzma if those two guys suit up. Pelicans do rank 25th in defensive efficiency to point guards. Would be a great option for Lonzo, or a good spot for Lonzo Ball if Rondo and Ingram miss this game. If they both play, I would not use him in anything other than in a large field tournament lineup or something like that, because his floor is really low. If he's not playing very well, Rondo and Ingram can eat into his minutes. Kuzma would take a big hit if Ingram comes back. Would not have interest in him outside of, again, a bunch of tournament lineups or something like that, but really tough to overlook how good he has been whenever Ingram and Rondo have been out of the lineup. Has basically been a guy that would get you like 40-plus fantasy points most nights. Tyson Chandler would be in play if JaVale McGee sits. JaVale McGee definitely in play if he is able to suit up tonight. And then, obviously, LeBron. It's LeBron. Don't really need to go into that one too much. Outside of that, Josh Hart, KCP would be value options if we get news that Ingram and Rondo are out. But that's going to do it for the 10-game slate. Good luck in all your contests tonight. I will be back tomorrow and on Sunday for a pretty big weekend of games.